Well, it's time to go a little old school with this. Sousou no Frieren, a manga that I had touched a year ago, and I read a few chapters, but at the time in which I read it, I found myself being very uninterested. I thought the initial premise of the series was fascinating. This grand elf mage who outlives all of her previous party members, which defeated the Demon King, and now it's her adventures after the fact, meeting up with them when they're old, seeing some of them on their deathbed, taking on some of their apprentices, and formulating a new party in which he ventures out with. But at the time, I was pretty burnt out, and sometimes when it comes to reading a series, it's not always the series itself, it's just you. And sometimes you have to revisit stuff later, and maybe you'll enjoy it more. And that was definitely the case with this. I think the fact that the story commences after the initial journey, which most stories would begin with, I think helps separate it immediately from everything that has a very similar presentation and aesthetic to Sousou no Frieren. Because if the premise isn't interesting enough, well then your visual presentation of said premise needs to be intriguing and stimulate the viewer more than anything that they've seen before, or at least feel different and have its own unique space. Like if Dorohedoro looked like a generic isekai, I think a large amount of the appeal of that story would lose its flavor. But with Sousou no Frieren, it's a bit of the opposite. The presentation of it isn't really what it is. If not, the premise is so strong, and the execution of said premise is even stronger, that it creates a story that really does separate itself from almost anything else I've ever read, as it allows the main character to pretty much have this established history from the jump commencing. And it's not like other stories where you get this long flashback or, this big moment where everything with the character is explained, although I imagine that will, get that gets sprinkled in throughout this story. But yeah, that's pretty much it. With this story gets sprinkled in, and it does a really good job of managing the flashbacks, because all of the flashbacks that would tie into knowing more about Frieren and her previous group, it gets tied into the present day moments and helps enhance these present day scenes and the interactions with the characters she travels with now. And the series also does a really good job with its dialogue, and I think a combination of all those elements is what allows the beginning chapters to have such a strong start. It genuinely feels like these are well-established characters that we are meeting at this specific point within the story, instead of trying to catch us up on all of the things that they did and everything about the characters in these massive expedition dumps, but instead these very well-timed moments that are sprinkled throughout that help show why the character is the way that they are now. If there was any sort of very easy comparison I could give, although it's not a one-to-one at all, remember how it felt when we followed Kakashi throughout the entire story of Naruto, and then we found out kind of how he was before and how much he's drastically changed now up to this point. I think with Frieren, it's a very different thing, but it gives off a very similar feeling, which is impressive because I have not been with this character nearly as long, but yet it feels like there is this genuine history that was well thought out. And whenever she revisits old friends and old places, and they remark how much she's changed, and again, we get those flashback moments where we see how sort of cold and separated she was to her friends and to just people in general and relationships, and how all of that really works, and see an attempt to be better at it now, given what she was exposed to through her party that defeated the Demon King. It really creates these touching moments. It's interesting how a character who outlives all of humans pretty much by a long shot has a very good perspective on kind of what makes us as humans tick. And it's one of those things where me and Scam were talking about it when discussing Pluto, and he said something that I think would apply here, but it's usually things that are non-human that in stories seem to have a really good commentary on very core aspects to us as people. I'm paraphrasing, those weren't his exact words. I might be misquoting him, so kill me if you see this dude. But the point of it is that with Frieren, we're able to really be reminded of things that are important throughout our own lives, because we're all mortal, but yet sometimes we live life like if we have all the time in the world to do things. But yet the constant reminder, even with the most powerful mage ever, to enjoy the simple things in life, I think is a really beautiful reminder. And I think that's the way I would kind of describe this story. It's this weird feeling of nostalgic and beauty all in one. And it's like you've been with this story forever, even though you haven't. And so seeing her revisit places almost 100 years later at times is something that are some of the more emotionally impactful moments throughout the entire series. But also the interactions with the actual characters she travels with, Fern and Stark, the apprentices of her previous party. Those are all fun and enjoyable. It has a really good sense of when to place in comedy, also with Frieren herself, and it never comes off as ruining the moment, but if not justified, and helps add that sense of lightheartedness throughout the story. And the action itself is fine, but I think the real appeal of the series is the dialogue. And so I can't really speak on the anime. I haven't checked it out. I'm going back to manga for a bit, so those of you that's seen the anime could let me know. But when it comes to the manga, at least, if you're going into it expecting these crazy fight scenes and action as your reason for checking it out, this might not be for you, because it's going to be a decent bit into the story until you get fights that kind of like really scratch that itch that you might have. But if you're looking for genuine fun interactions between characters and something that will stick with you, I think emotionally more than a lot of other stuff you might have read in the year, I would highly recommend this. I think it's a really great story, and just because of the adventures that the characters previously had, and that is kind of like revisiting now. There are so many different messages the story will sprinkle out throughout, not only just with our own mortality and how we should go about living, but also what it really means to be a hero. Because, Frieren, she was there with these people that were considered legendary heroes, but she knew all of their flaws. She knew the myths that actually came with these legendary heroes, and the fact that they weren't perfect, but yet despite that, they were still able to excel and accomplish amazing things. And one of my favorite moments in the manga is pretty early on, where one of the characters, it feels like it's too late for them. There's no point in them trying because too much time has passed. And it has a quote about the only thing that matters is the present. And I think that's a beautiful mindset to have for anyone. It's good to think about the future, but the past is the past. And to have a character who's lived as long as Frieren and have that kind of perspective and understand that what matters now is the present, and having to learn that through her previous comrades. It's one of those touching moments that really stuck with me out of everything that I've read this year. And I know I'm not the first to compliment it. Everybody's been praising this manga for a very long time now. I'm a bit late to things, my bad. But after giving it a very fair chance, I would have to say that now that we're near the end of the year, Sousou no Frieren has definitely been one of the... I won't say the best, because I'd have to go through everything that I've read this year, but I know that it's definitely one of the better things that I've read, and I would highly recommend anyone to check it out. If the manga's a bit slow for you, then maybe try out the anime. I'm going to be checking out the anime actually probably after I upload this video, and I'll be able to see whether or not I think that is a better experience than the manga itself. But nonetheless, I would highly recommend you check it out and formulate your own thoughts on it. Also, just real quick, an announcement. I do have merch, so if you are interested, you could check that out in the link in the description below, as well as a Patreon for anybody who wants to support the channel. We do watch parties on the Discord. We've been watching Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2, so if you're interested in that, make sure you check out that link as well. Thank you all so much for your support, and I hope you all have a blessed rest of the day, and peace.